Hello and welcome to Judge for Yourself, another episode thereof. Today we're discussing the highly controversial Red October campaign. It was started by a group of white South Africans who feel that they've been threatened and targeted by black South Africans. Some are even claiming there's a white genocide going on in the country as a whole. The campaign has naturally received a lot of criticism, many saying it's nothing but a white supremacist movement, others in fact saying it articulates legitimate anxieties. To discuss this topic, we're joined by the organizer of the Red campaign, Sunette Bridges, and Angelo Fick, a senior lecturer at Wits University specializing in critical thinking, race and identity. Let's begin with a clip from Steve Hofmeyer, who also has been intimately involved in this particular campaign.
We are not used to this mortality rate. We are not used to being raped at this rate, and most importantly, we are not used to being raped by other cultures, tribes, ethnicities.
Before I continue, I also want to say that apart from the two guests I have, we had invited Andile Mtami, couldn't come, he got us a substitute, she hasn't pitched up either, and I just wanted to say we were trying to get a broader sample of guests. We haven't done that, but we'll do our best to in fact interrogate this topic. So let me start with you. I don't really understand this. What are you suggesting, that white people are under threat?
We're not suggesting it. I mean, we actually know that we are. We know that white people are under threat.
Why do you feel under threat?
Well, I feel under threat just for the mere fact that I have 5 children of who are starting to finish school this year, and I know each and every one of my kids will most probably have to leave the country to get a job. Because of affirmative action, broad-based black economic empowerment, because of the fact that we are not really welcomed in the job sector. These things we know. I myself, I've been in 2 attempted hijackings, had 4 smash and grab incidents. I'm scared. I'm scared to let my 18-year-old girl go out by herself at night.
Black South Africans are not scared either by the crime?
I'm pretty sure they are. But
so
they are not.
So then why are we talking about this in race terms?
Well, black South Africans are not being targeted by white people, and it is an issue. It is an issue.
But why what I'm intrigued by is, why do you put this in race terms?
If you look at...
I mean, let's get something out of the way before I probe further. There's no question, I've done many of these programs and I'm not going to fool anybody, and I wouldn't be fooling myself or any viewer here to suggest that we don't have an appalling crime rate. And we'll talk about that a little later. But that crime rate is, to a large degree, focused in black and poor areas. That's where the majority of crime is.
That may be true. And if you look at the demographic, 80% of the people getting murdered are black people getting murdered by black people. And if you look at the age
group...
group...
checked whether they're black or white people. Why are you so meticulously checking?
Because white people are being killed by black people. That is a problem.
And when white people get attacked by white people, and you get quite a bit of that.
No, you don't actually
get
quite a bit of that.
Well, we've got a lot of interfamily violence, and that includes whites and whites and blacks, I suspect.
It's not even 1% of the amount of white people that are getting murdered currently. And the biggest problem we are facing is that most of these people that are getting murdered at the rate 4 times higher than anybody else in this country are white farmers. Are
you convinced about your statistics? Because I'm going to show you some a little later.
Yes, I am convinced about my
statistics. And where do you get these statistics from? That
from the Transvaal Agricultural Union, from the South African Institute of Race Relations, from the South African Police, from the Medical Research Council.
We'll look at a racial analysis of murders later. But let me just ask you this. I mean, don't you think that this kind of campaign is only going to exacerbate race tensions rather than, in a sense, achieving some reconciliation?
No, I don't think so whatsoever. I think I don't understand why white people being murdered by black people at the rate that is currently happening is not causing tension. But speaking out about it is causing tension. Makes no sense to me whatsoever. The demographic of the white South Africans that are being killed are 65 years of age on average.
Well, we'll get to that in a moment. The statistics are one thing, the debate is another. Let me ask you, when I first read about this, I confess I thought, what's going on here? And yet this is probing an obvious anxiety.
Yes, and I think anxiety is a key word there, because I think it has to do with perceptions, and one does not want to downplay people's perceptions. But I do think one must separate what one perceives to be happening from what is actually happening. You know, for example, in South Africa, generally middle-class people feel that they are more likely to be victims of crime because they're middle class and property crime, when actually the statistics tell us that the poorer you are, the more likely you are to be victimized.
Yes, I want to show
criminality.
statistics in a minute and ask Sunette also to respond to that. But
So my sense is that we need to separate perceptions and the way in which people perceive their lives and their life chances in South Africa from the realities of what may actually be going on out there.
Well, let me ask you this. You're at a university.
Right.
Let's just probe one issue before we take a break. This issue which comes up often, that affirmative action, black economic empowerment, etc., shuts off job opportunities for whites.
Look, again, I think that there is a commonsensical perception that circulates at dinner parties and in people's social lives that their life chances are reduced in South Africa because of the colour of their skin, in this case because they're white. I'm not certain that any of the governing bodies for any of their professions have indicated that this is the case. We know this from the Law Society, we know this from the medical profession, that actually it's sometimes quite the opposite.
And that's what's worrying me, is that unfortunately, I mean, if we had this debate in a broader context, I'm quite sure that if someone like Andele was here, he would say exactly the opposite. He'd say, well, the economy is run by whites, the professions are run by whites, what are they complaining about? Aren't we dealing here with two unbelievably diametrically opposite perceptions? And how do we unpack that?
Well, partly I think we need to start asking the far more fundamental question, which is what was gained in post-apartheid South Africa and what was given up and who by?
Okay, it's a very good question. I've got to take a break and we'll come back to that.
From the 1st of December, government officials will have to abide by a number of cost-cutting rules to clamp down on excessive spending.
A crucial document containing
So just a statistic which comes from Africa Check. They have done an analysis of your claims in relation to the question of murders. And what they're suggesting is a diametrically opposed approach to you. They say that 86.9% of all murders are in fact the victims of black. Whites account for only 1.8% of cases, even though they represent roughly 8-9% of the population.
The Africa Check study has already been refuted, has
By
been
who?
argumented against by very many people who did research on their study,
No,
showing
I've
that
studied the other research.
they took
There's
all
no
they took
so
all their
where-
statistics from 2009, and what they did is they didn't take
And you took yours
all
from
the figures.
2003.
No.
From the from this other study that you've relied on, the McCafferty.
No, I didn't take anything
Well,
from
what
that.
I mean, what other study?
I'm not relying on studies.
But
What
that's-
I'm relying on is the mere fact that a white South African farmer has a 4 times bigger chance of getting murdered than anybody else in this country.
Well, that's not
It's
true on the
twice,
figures.
It is true.
No, you're claiming that.
No,
but
I'm
the
not
figures
claiming that.
Where does the figures show that?
Every single piece of research
If
published now.
86.9% of all murders are black people, and only 1.8% are white people.
The murder rate for South Africa is 31.8% per 100,000 of the population.
Yes, and many of them are black.
The murder rate for white South African farmers is 120 of
Where
100,000
do you get
people
that
of the
from?
white South. It's from the Institute of
This is a
Security
figure.
Studies.
Well, no. This
It
is
was-
this is the Tauser. That's your figures.
No, that's not my figure.
Well, those are the ones that
This
I
is
have,
the
which is
official
sort that.
figure released by the South African Police Services. It
Now,
also
it's interesting,
says
in the 2003 Police Committee of Inquiry, it was 38.4% of farm attack victims described as being black, coloured or Asian.
yes, this is
Right?
in 2003.
There is seriously exaggeration about this.
There is no
the point
exaggeration
no,
about
the
this.
point about it is you are making a very serious claim. Mr. Hoffman is making a serious claim that in fact we're on the verge of some form of genocide.
We are indeed.
Are you suggesting that white people are being targeted deliberately?
Yes, of course.
Do you make no allowances for the fact that, number one, the figures show that it's a disproportionately low percentage. Number two, to the extent that there are murders, that there's a class situation here, that wealthier people do get targeted.
We are...
Do you make no allowances for that?
No.
Why not?
We are on a list, there are 126 countries on a list of 225 that are worse off than us economically, poorer than us economically, where people suffer and the disparity between wealthy and poor is much bigger, and there is not this rate of violent crime.
Yes, and that's the truth, and the fact of the matter is, I agree with you. We should be enormously disturbed by this. Our debate isn't whether there is violent crime. Our debate is your claim that there's a genocide here on white people. And I'm suggesting to you that is both irresponsible.
Do you understand what a genocide is, though?
Yes, it's a deliberate attack. Yes, I do know what a genocide is. Absolutely. And the fact that I'm suggesting to you is that you are suggesting that there's an intentional campaign to murder, kill, maim, a particular targeted group of people who happened in this case to be whites.
That's correct.
And I'm saying the statistics don't bear that up, and it's a kind of claim which is enormously destructive of race relations.
No, the murders are destructive of race relations.
I agree with you.
It is, you cannot ignore the fact that white South Africans are currently being murdered at a rate of between 20 and 25 per month.
No, I can do that
by black people.
Because I give you the statistics. You say you don't have proper counsel once the thing, and yet you make the claim.
I don't make the claim. Here are the names.
Whether they're names, I'm saying to you, I'm not suggesting for one moment that there aren't appalling amounts of murders. But if you total this up in terms of the total amount of murders...
Would you still call it normal crime? If we are 8% of the population and 20 white people get murdered every month by black people, if suddenly 200 black people got murdered by white people in this country, would that still be considered normal crime?
Why do you persist in this idea that, you see, your claim has to be based on the fact that there's a deliberate campaign.
Yes, it is a deliberate campaign.
And what evidence do you have other than these statistics?
Just to start off with, we have a president that gets onto a stage in a stadium in front of thousands of people and sings, "Shoot the Boer, bring me my machine gun." Yes, Jacob Zuma sang this at the Mangaung conference in front of thousands of people. "Bring me my machine gun, shoot the Boer." They are cowards.
And you think that that particular song, you think that that is a deliberate, that is clear evidence of a campaign to murder white people?
It is just one element of it.
What else do you have?
We have sorry that they didn't pitch up today to state their case. They have just registered a political party. They sing that song at every single one of their rallies. Then they keep on saying that white people stole everything. We stole the land. We stole the mines. We stole the jobs. We stole everything.
You don't think black people have a legitimate grievance of 300 years of racist rule?
No, they don't, especially not against the Afrikaner.
You see, now what interests me is, I mean, this is a view that's held by quite a lot of people. We have no hope of a non-racial democracy when people hold this view and people hold the diametrically opposed view.
Yes, and I think partly...
And that should freak everybody out.
That should be of great concern, and it is, but I have another concern, which is there are numbers of white South Africans who've spoken out against this particular campaign, right? And there's a reason for that, and there's, it's necessary. But my concern is that Ms. Bridges' professions here of her understandings of history, her understandings of differences between people, is not quite as extreme, as marginal, or as non-representative as we may think it is. That for many very polite middle class, particularly Anglophone South Africans, similar ideas circulate in their social environment. They just don't come out and speak it.
But then let me ask you this. The difficulty that I've got with that particular proposition is not that it's not correct, but we do not seem to be able to have a sensible debate about our past. I mean, I find other people, there's an article which I picked up, there's one by Mkhize in the Sunday Times, and there's another one, she's written quite a lot by Skitter, I think, Gillian Skitter. Yes. Now, I see that, on the other hand, as like, you can't have a critical attitude at all if you're Gillian Skitter. You simply accept that everything's marvellous. you've got so consumed by white guilt that you can't be a citizen of this country.
Yeah, that there is the self-silencing and possibly the moment of paralysis.
Yeah. And you can't have a non-racial democracy if people can't articulate their viewpoints without that. And so
Yes.
how do we get past that?
Well, firstly, I think that many South Africans continue to be quite invested in the myths of the past rather than the actual historical material. So stating, for example, that white South Africans, or the descendants of, the white South Africans are descendants of people who participated in imperial, colonial and other settlement projects, and that those projects weren't equal interactions between the indigenous population and the new arrivals. That's just historically inaccurate. That's refusing historical material. And the more recent the historical material, the more likely we are to deny it as South Africans. So we pretend that we've gone through the 1990s, through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and now the playing field's are level and we all participate.
Which is nonsense as well.
Which we know the facts are not.
But are you saying that because these playing fields aren't level, as far as you are concerned, that then we have to endure what is happening?
Well, it's a question
There
of what
needs
we
to
mean
be
by
an-
endurance.
yes.
I want to probe you on this, if I may, because
sure.
it's terribly important. But can I take a break first, and I want to come back to you?
Of course.
But with
Welcome back. I want to talk about this. Do you accept in any way that apartheid was a system that oppressed people on the basis of colour?
Absolutely, which is why it was voted by white people. It was voted out in 1992.
So you accept that. If you accept that, do you accept that our country was required to make some form of redress for the past?
Well, it is not making any form of redress for the past, which is exactly what is the problem. 20 years into ANC rule, we have a worse education system than ever. More people are jobless than ever. We've lost 360,000 people due to murders, as opposed to 22,000 in a 46-year period before that. Nothing is better for anybody except a small group of elite.
Now that's a very different proposition, because that's a proposition which suggests we're in serious trouble about our transformation.
Yes.
The follow-up question would be then, why are you not contributing to a debate about how we get it right? How do we do proper redress? Rather than suggesting on, I would want to suggest to you rather tendentious grounds, that there's a genocide underway.
Well, let me tell you why. Firstly, I'm not a politician, and we are 4 million white South Africans left in this country.
Yeah.
We do not have a vote, and we very rarely have a voice.
You have a vote.
Our vote doesn't count for anything, you know that very well.
Well, it depends.
Our vote cannot change this country in the way that when black people are unhappy about the current situation, they can change it. We have to address the things that we are concerned about. 20 years after affirmative action and broad-based black economic empowerment, how many more white people do you need to move out of the job market? There are 1 million white people left. There are, 25 million black people that don't have
It's a real debatable issue
jobs.
about where the statistics show,
sunset
because
clause?
what black consciousness people would say, and indeed people within the government as well, to be fair, is that whites still dominate in all the key professions.
Why
Whether
is
it be-
there black consciousness in South Africa?
Why would you
Why
think
is
there
white
is?
consciousness not okay?
Well,
Our
be-
white consciousness
Because
says
white
that we are
consciousness
being
create-
murdered.
Well, okay, I don't want to go back to that, but let me put this to you if I can. My anxiety is that 35 million people, black people, historically disadvantaged people, presently disadvantaged people, are the ones that actually, I would have thought we should be concentrating our attention on more than any other group.
Yes.
Why aren't we?
Well, I think if you're in the middle classes in this country, or you've arrived in the middle classes, so regardless of what your previous class position was, if you're a professional, you're educated, you have a job, you're employed, you have a career, to a large extent this country works for us and it's designed for us. So we complain about the inefficiencies, but to a large extent it does work
Is
for
that
us.
becoming a non-racial elite?
I don't think it's a non-racial elite, but I think it's an elite that cuts across the differences that the old
Are we
apartheid
becoming
system.
more of a class-based society?
I think we're a heavily class-based society in which race does not play a role. Race is a very significant determinant of what class possibilities and class mobility possibilities you have. But I do think that if you're middle class, this country, to a large extent, does work for you.
Okay.
It's beginning to not work for many of us.
You feel it doesn't work for you?
Obviously,
as a middle-class person.
Obviously it works for the middle-class people, but when you campaign for something, you're not campaigning for the middle-class people who are quite happy with what is going on. The status quo works for them. When you are part of a minority group, and I have to say that we made this huge claim of being a rainbow nation. Nobody ever said that we were going to stir all the colors together and become a one unified culture. We were supposed to keep all the cultures and look after them and make them grow and not get rid of them. There are black people, Zulu, Xhosa, Sotho, Tswana people, Pedi people, who are not happy about the fact that even their cultures are being intermingled and intermixed and not acknowledged. But I am a white South African. That is what I am. And I'm also an Afrikaner.
Yes.
My language is important to me.
You've got
when I get a varsity professor at Koffsies, where I used to study, saying that we should get rid of Afrikaans because it's a barrier to reconciliation.
Well, we're having a program, but I wanted to probe you on something. I mean, we all carry multiple identities. All of us. Well, we do. I mean, you know, let me illustrate. I'm a white, male, heterosexual, Jew, South African, middle-aged.
Yes.
I have a whole baggage of stuff.
And if you were a white homosexual male and you marched for the rights of gay people, would anybody have a problem with that?
Well, what I'm interested in is this. When you made your claim earlier, you said nothing's better. Black people also get a pretty lousy show of the dice, as it were, 35 million of them, or whatever the case may be. Why don't you join with those people? Why don't you say, we're in this boat together. In fact, if your lot improves, all of us will improve.
We'll have
say
less
that, murders,
but
less
that's
violence.
Exactly what we said.
But then why?
We said we are a minority group.
But you can't do that if you consistently use race as your criteria.
But the point remains that white people are being murdered by black people. You can never change that. We went and said that we are being targeted. Our farmers are not being looked after. Our language is being worked out of schools.
And you don't think 35 million people can't make the same claim on the same basis as you said? It shows that there's a problem here which is not a white problem. It's a problem of how do we actually redress this enormous legacy. Wasn't that always going to be a problem? I'm sorry, can I just ask you?
Yes, I think also for me, my concern with Ms. Bridges' analysis is that when it's convenient for her analysis, then she has black people as one group. So black people are murdered by white people.
Yes, it's essentialism.
But then the next moment she's talking about different ethnicities. Are those black people in their bulk killing different from the black people in their ethnicities complaining about their disappearing cultures? You know, are we talking about two different groups of people? Or is it the same group of people who are conveniently useful for the argument when defined as black, amorphous and a mass up against white people, and then at other points conveniently separated into very discrete notions of discrete cultures that don't exist, that actually do not exist on the ground, that people aren't that culturally isolated.
I'm afraid I have to end this. I suspect we're not going to, this won't be the end of the debate, just the end of this particular session. When Mr. Mandela wrote his autobiography, he called it Long Walk to Freedom. Why do we think that, in fact, the walk to freedom, meaning the walk to the society which is in the Constitution, enshrined therein, of dignity, equality and freedom for all, no matter race, no matter sexual orientation, no matter gender, was going to be an easy one? Of course, what we are hearing here is the anxiety about why it's taking so long, and the troubles and tribulations that have gone along the way, and the anxieties that certain groups feel. How legitimate are they? How much should we accept that this is going to be a longer walk to freedom than we thought to be the case? Well, you've heard quite a bit of the anxiety. Why don't you judge for yourself? Goodbye.